There comes a point in every intelligent person's life when the world suddenly loses its shape. You wake up one morning and realize that nothing feels solid anymore. Not your ambitions, not your relationships, not even the idea of who you are. It's as if the scaffolding of your identity has quietly collapsed while you were busy pretending to have it all together. You try to care again. You tell yourself maybe a new job, a new person, a new plan will fix it. But deep down, you already know it won't. Because the emptiness isn't out there, it's inside you. This is the silent crisis Søren Kierkegaard spoke about, a kind of spiritual vertigo that strikes when the soul realizes it has been living someone else's life. He called it despair, not the kind that makes you cry, but the kind that makes you numb. The kind that whispers, "Something is missing, but I can't name what it is." And that's the truth most people can't bear to face. Because to admit you feel lost is to admit that your entire foundation, your beliefs, your values, your identity, might be built on sand. But Kierkegaard believed this moment of collapse is not a curse. It is the beginning of awakening, if you have the courage to face what it's trying to show you. Søren Kierkegaard lived in 19th century Denmark, a quiet, introspective man in a world obsessed with appearances. He wasn't a preacher or a professor chasing approval. He was something rarer, a man who refused to lie to himself. While others hid behind the masks of religion or social success, Kierkegaard dared to look directly at the terrifying question, what does it mean to truly be yourself? To him, most people never find out. They spend their lives performing, believing that if they play their roles well enough, happiness will follow. They go to work, fall in love, follow the rules, say the right words, and yet, underneath it all, there's a quiet panic. Because no matter how perfect the act becomes, it still feels hollow. Kierkegaard called this despair. Not because you've lost something external, but because you've lost yourself. He described 3 layers of despair, though he never used the language of psychology. The first is despair of ignorance, the person who doesn't even realize they're lost. They think everything is fine because life seems stable. They drown the faint echo of unease with distraction, social media, endless work, shallow pleasures. They never question their direction, because questioning might reveal there's no real direction at all. The second is despair of weakness, when a person finally realizes their life is empty, but cannot face the truth of it. This is where most intelligent people fall. You become aware that something is deeply off, that you're just going through the motions, but instead of changing course, you freeze. You tell yourself you'll fix it later, that this is just a phase. You cling to comfort, even when it's killing you slowly. And then there's the final form, the despair of defiance. This is the most dangerous of all. It's when a person sees the emptiness, recognizes it fully, and still refuses to surrender control. They say, "I will define myself. I will be my own God." But in doing so, they build an identity out of rebellion, an ego made of pride and pain. And though it feels powerful, it's still despair, because it is still disconnected from truth. Kierkegaard's brilliance was in seeing that despair isn't an emotion. It's a condition of being. It's what happens when your outer life no longer matches your inner truth, when your soul is crying out for authenticity, but your ego keeps pretending everything's fine. He believed that modern people, even back then, were obsessed with fitting in. They wanted to belong to the crowd. And the crowd, he said, is the most seductive lie of all. Because when you lose yourself in it, you no longer have to think. You no longer have to face the question of who you are. You can just follow. But Kierkegaard saw something terrifying in that comfort. He wrote that the crowd is untruth. Meaning, the moment you let your life be dictated by what others expect, you've already abandoned your individuality. You've already betrayed the only thing that makes your existence real. He believed every person carries 2 selves, the self the world sees, and the self that quietly observes. The outer self is what you build, your image, your career, your name, your place in society. But the inner self, the one that watches silently from behind your thoughts, That's the one you spend your whole life trying to silence. Because it doesn't care about applause or approval. It only cares about truth. And that's what makes Kierkegaard so disturbing. He's not giving advice about success or happiness. He's telling you that until you reconcile those two selves, you will always feel lost, no matter what you achieve. This is why his ideas still haunt us today. Because the modern world runs on everything he warned against. It teaches us to chase comfort instead of depth, pleasure instead of purpose, validation instead of authenticity. We've built a culture that rewards masks, the confident smile, the curated image, the illusion of meaning. But Kierkegaard believed this endless pursuit of false identities leads to only one destination: despair. A subtle, invisible despair that hides behind busyness, ambition, and the endless need to appear okay. He saw that most people don't want freedom, they want distraction from freedom. Because true freedom, he said, begins when you realize that you alone are responsible for who you become. And that's where the terror begins. Because once you strip away all the roles, the son, the friend, the lover, the employee, what's left? What if there's nothing underneath? That's the question that shakes people to their core. And that's the reason so many intelligent men and women feel lost today. Not because life has no meaning, but because they've never dared to define it for themselves. Kierkegaard believed this confrontation, this breakdown of identity, is the only way to awaken. When everything external collapses, when your illusions crumble, you are forced to meet yourself. Not the version you show to others, but the silent, trembling consciousness that has been watching all along. He called this moment the sickness unto death, not a physical death, but a spiritual one. The death of falsehood. The death of everything you thought you were. And if you can endure that death, if you can face the unbearable emptiness without running, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel the first flicker of truth, the first glimpse of a self not built by the world, but born from your own awareness. That, Kierkegaard said, is what it means to become a real human being. The modern world is exactly what Kierkegaard feared, a theater of distraction. Every screen, every algorithm, every voice tells you who to be, what to want, and how to feel. You scroll through thousands of lives that aren't yours, measuring your worth against pixels. You perform for approval you don't even believe in. You tell yourself this is connection, but it's really camouflage. Kierkegaard's warning wasn't about religion or morality. It was about self-deception. He saw that when people are terrified of silence, it's because silence exposes the truth. They have no idea who they are without noise. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone, not because you care about the news, but because you're afraid of the moment before it. That tiny window of stillness where your mind whispers, "What am I doing with my life?" This is what Kierkegaard called the despair of self-avoidance. It's not that you don't know what's wrong, it's that you're too afraid to stop running long enough to see it. Think about how modern society defines success. The ideal man is productive, confident, and always on. He earns, he grinds, he never questions. The ideal woman is perfect, composed, endlessly admired. Everyone is expected to be something. But no one is allowed to just be. And this, Kierkegaard would say, is why so many intelligent people feel trapped. The more aware you are, the harder it becomes to ignore the performance. You see the emptiness in your own ambition. You watch people chase validation like oxygen, and you realize, this is hell dressed as progress. He would tell you that anxiety is not your enemy. It's your soul trying to wake you up. It's the moment your inner self rebels against the lies your outer self keeps living. Anxiety, to Kierkegaard, was the proof of freedom. Because only a free being can sense the abyss, the infinite possibilities of who they could become. But freedom, as beautiful as it sounds, is unbearable. Most people will do anything to escape it. They'll bury themselves in relationships, jobs, ideologies, anything that offers certainty. Because certainty is comforting. Freedom is terrifying. And this shows up everywhere today. In relationships, for example, Kierkegaard would say most people don't love, they cling. They turn another person into a mirror to reflect their worth. When the reflection fades, so does the illusion. That's why love so often turns into resentment, because it was never rooted in truth. It was rooted in fear. Don't leave me, or I won't know who I am. He would say the cure isn't to find the right partner, but to face the loneliness that drives you to seek them. Because only a person who has made peace with their own solitude can love without desperation. In society, Kierkegaard's insights cut even deeper. We've replaced genuine individuality with curated rebellion. Everyone wants to stand out, but only within approved limits. The influencer who preaches authenticity is often just another mask, one more performance of realness for attention. Kierkegaard would laugh bitterly at this, because he saw it coming. He knew that the modern age would worship freedom while quietly erasing it. And in personal growth, his message is just as piercing. We treat self-improvement like a product, something to consume, something to display. But you can't optimize your soul. Kierkegaard would say that real transformation begins where optimization ends, when you stop trying to become what's admirable, and start becoming what's true. He would look at our obsession with happiness and say, "You are chasing a shadow." Because happiness, to him, was not a goal. It was a byproduct of alignment. You cannot be happy while living in contradiction with your own nature. That's the paradox of modern life. We have everything except ourselves. We have comfort without meaning, pleasure without fulfillment, communication without understanding. We've built a civilization that promises connection but breeds isolation. Kierkegaard's answer was radical. You must lose everything false before you can find anything real. You must let go of the masks, even the good ones. The persona that earns praise. The identity that keeps you safe. The story you tell yourself about who you are. Because the truth isn't something you discover. It's something you become. And becoming requires death. The death of who you were pretending to be. That's what Kierkegaard meant by dying to self. It's not about suffering for suffering's sake. It's about breaking the illusion that you can live meaningfully while hiding from your own consciousness. Every time you avoid that inner confrontation, you feed the despair. You strengthen the false self. You drift a little further from the truth. But when you finally stop, when you dare to sit in the silence and face the unbearable reality of being you, something shifts. The masks begin to crumble. The roles lose their power. And in that raw, terrifying emptiness, you find a flicker of something real. Not joy. Not relief. But truth. Kierkegaard believed that's where life actually begins, not in success, not in pleasure, not even in love, but in the brutal honesty of standing alone before yourself, and saying, "This is me. I don't know who I'm supposed to be. But I refuse to lie anymore." That's why, even today, his philosophy feels like a mirror we're afraid to look into. Because it forces us to admit that maybe the reason we feel lost isn't because life is meaningless, but because we've been living a lie so long we forgot what meaning feels like. And if you can face that, if you can endure that truth without running back into the noise, you might begin to live not as a role, but as a soul. Kierkegaard never wrote self-help books, but his writings are filled with the kind of truths that shatter illusions rather than comfort them. He didn't want to make you feel better, he wanted to make you real. And from his torment, from his loneliness and relentless search for authenticity, we can extract lessons that feel less like advice and more like commandments whispered from the edge of the soul. The first is this: stop running. Every distraction, every addiction, every endless scroll is a way of fleeing from yourself. You tell yourself you're unwinding, but what you're really doing is sedating your own awareness. Kierkegaard would call this despair in disguise, the quiet panic of a man too afraid to be alone with his thoughts. The cure is not in doing more, but in stopping. In standing still long enough for the truth to surface. The moment you stop running, the real healing begins, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Never outsource your meaning. You cannot live a genuine life on borrowed beliefs. Society offers you prepackaged identities, career titles, ideologies, aesthetics, even moral codes, and calls them truth. But meaning cannot be inherited. It must be earned through personal confrontation. Kierkegaard believed that faith, purpose, and identity only become real when they are chosen freely, even if that freedom costs you everything familiar. If you want a life that feels alive, you must be willing to think, and suffer, for yourself. Do not fear despair, fear numbness. Despair, Kierkegaard said, is the sickness unto death, but it's also a sign that your soul is still fighting. The absence of despair doesn't mean you're healthy. It might just mean you're sedated. When you feel lost, when life feels hollow, when the silence screams, don't escape it. Listen. That pain is your compass, pointing toward the places you've abandoned inside yourself. The man who can face despair without retreating becomes indestructible. Authenticity demands sacrifice. To be true to yourself, you must betray everything false. The roles that earn approval, the relationships that depend on your pretending, the systems that reward obedience over truth. Most people never live authentically because they're terrified of the cost. Kierkegaard would say, that's the price of being real. You cannot keep your comfort and your freedom. One must die for the other to live. Faith is not blind belief, it's courageous doubt. For Kierkegaard, faith wasn't about dogma. It was about standing before the absurdity of existence and saying, I will live anyway. True faith begins where certainty ends. It's not about having all the answers, but about daring to act even when the answers are gone. In a world obsessed with clarity, this kind of faith is rebellion, a declaration that life's mystery is not something to be solved, but to be lived through. You must suffer consciously. Avoided pain becomes destiny. Every time you bury an emotion, it buries you back. Kierkegaard saw suffering as the forge of the self, the crucible in which authenticity is born. The goal isn't to seek pain, but to meet it with awareness. To let it refine you instead of define you. The man who suffers consciously becomes wise. The man who suffers unconsciously remains lost. Stop performing strength, embody it. Modern men are obsessed with appearing unshaken. But the performance of strength is weakness disguised. Kierkegaard would say that true strength is vulnerability without collapse, the courage to feel deeply without being destroyed by it. The authentic man doesn't suppress his fear, he integrates it. He walks with his doubts, his grief, his uncertainty, and still moves forward. The crowd is the greatest seduction. He wrote, the crowd is untruth. And today, that warning feels prophetic. The crowd no longer exists only in the streets. It lives in your phone, your feed, your sense of self. Every opinion, every outrage, every trend pulls you into collective noise, until you mistake conformity for belonging. The only way out is solitude. Not isolation, but deliberate withdrawal, the space where your own voice becomes audible again. Do not confuse motion for progress. The modern soul is addicted to movement. Always building, planning, striving, terrified of stillness. But Kierkegaard would remind you that motion without direction is chaos. Sometimes, not moving is the most courageous act. Sometimes, the next step is to sit in the ruins of your plans and ask, who am I now that they've collapsed? And finally, remember, the truth will always cost you your falsehoods. There is no painless awakening. To become real, you must die many small deaths, of ego, of expectation, of illusion. But each death clears the fog, each loss returns a fragment of your soul. You will lose friends, comfort, and approval. But in their place, you will gain something sacred, the quiet power of being whole. That's what Kierkegaard was trying to show us, not how to be happy, but how to be true. Not how to escape despair, but how to walk through it with eyes open. Not how to fit into the world, but how to exist as a soul that no longer needs to. The world will call that madness. Kierkegaard called it faith. Kierkegaard's message was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to tear away every illusion until nothing false remained. That's why so many people avoid his words, because he doesn't offer hope in the way we expect. He offers something far more dangerous. He offers truth. He believed that most people spend their entire lives asleep, convinced they're awake. They move from one goal to the next, one identity to another, endlessly searching for something they can't name. But what they're really searching for is themselves, the self buried beneath obligation, image, and fear. And the tragedy is that most will die without ever meeting that self. But if you're listening to this, maybe something in you is already stirring, that faint, haunting awareness that your life, as it is, doesn't belong to you. That your laughter feels forced, your confidence rehearsed, your joy borrowed. Maybe you've already felt the quiet terror Kierkegaard described, that moment when the mask slips, and for a split second, you see the emptiness underneath. That's not the end. That's the beginning. You see, Kierkegaard didn't want you to escape despair. He wanted you to go through it. Because despair, when faced with honesty, burns away everything unreal. It strips you of your roles, your false strength, your convenient truths. It leaves you naked before yourself, and in that nakedness, for the first time, you are real. He called that the leap of faith. Not faith in religion, not faith in answers, but faith in the possibility of becoming whole. The courage to exist without guarantees. The willingness to face the chaos of life and still say, "Yes, I choose to live." That is the secret Kierkegaard tried to leave behind, that your lostness is not a failure, it's an initiation. It's your soul refusing to settle for imitation. The confusion, the emptiness, the quiet ache, it's the sound of your false self dying. And if you can endure that death, if you can hold steady while the walls collapse, something miraculous happens. You emerge not as who the world told you to be, but as who you were meant to be all along. You stop seeking meaning, and start embodying it. You stop searching for love, and start radiating it. You stop demanding certainty, and start dancing with uncertainty. And though the world will not understand you, though they will call you strange, detached, maybe even lost, you will know a truth they cannot touch, that to be lost in the eyes of the world is to finally be found in the eyes of your soul. Kierkegaard's truth is merciless, but it's also liberating. Because to feel lost is not the end of your story. It's the first honest chapter of your real one. And perhaps, somewhere deep within, you already knew that all along.